thank you all for joining us. We have some other programs represented. Lori Blewett's Crafting Truth, right? Where are you all at? Where are the Crafting Truths? Whoa,
Awesome.
reality. Okay, where's the Media Works? Woo!
Yay.
All right.
And how about interns?
Any interns?
Yay.
Woo!
And Ruth, is your program here?
I'm on a sabbatical. I don't
Oh,
know.
right.
We have sabbatical.
Thanks for coming.
Can I get your application for Media Works next year? Ruth and I will be teaching Media Works together. That's what's inside them.
Anyone else unaccounted for in those three categories?
You're on
Okay.
Crafting Truth?
Oh,
Okay.
yes, student.
I'm just ILC.
I'll see.
Yay.
Awesome.
All right. So thanks for joining us. I wanted to acknowledge the hard work of Caitlin, who's one of our TAs. She kind of took on this as an extra project this quarter to help us coordinate, as well as some of the staff and other faculty who've been really helping support some of these things. So I just want to welcome you all and thank you all for the hard work to bring back our illustrious alumni. Since we're in media, most likely they're stuck in traffic and finishing up projects along I-5, but as people come, we're just going to do kind of rolling introductions. So Julie asked me to start with our two that have gotten here on time, so thank you all for promptly getting here. And I'll just read a little bit from your bios, and then we'll have you all kind of introduce yourself and fill us in on some of your work. Okay, so our first participant who is here is Ryan K. Adams, and he's been making films for 27 years. Right on, you're surviving. That's like something to high five. He studied classic experimental cinema at Evergreen, which is awesome. And he graduated, so did you graduate, what year were you?
Like 96, I think.
96, okay. So he's shot several feature lengths as a cinematographer, including Sundance film of 2011, The Oregonian, which is currently distributed by Sundance and available online, so we can all watch it. Come on in, we have some more. And then as well as William Never Married, which won Best Cinematography at the 2010 Downtown Film Festival in Los Angeles and is also available on Hulu. He works as an Instructional Digital Media Manager for the University of Washington. So thank you, Ryan, for coming. Why don't you, did you want to do one at a time?
Yeah, let's do one at a time while we
Okay.
get settled.
So if you don't mind kind of introducing yourself,
Sure.
Ryan, and filling us in just on who you are, aside from what I said. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Again, I'm Ryan Adams. I graduated in 96, and I was in Media Works then with Lori Meeker and Marge Brown.
I worked with Lori Meeker.
Yeah. And so, and then I haven't updated that bio in a while because I'm also a board member of the Interbay Cinema Society with Ruth, who I don't know if we've ever met, but we're going to have a barbecue here soon. And so if you guys know anything about the Interbay Cinema Society, it was started by my friend Jon Behrens, who's an experimental filmmaker, and gives film grants to anybody that if you've shot on film and you need your film transferred to video, we give 3-hour chunks of time for film transfer at Light Press in downtown Seattle. Great guys, great organization. And there's also rumors we're going to start a film festival for film-originated content, so that might be coming up soon too. After Evergreen, I went and ended up working at Alpha Cine, Motion Picture Laboratory in downtown Seattle that's now long gone. There's no film processing in Seattle anymore. So I spent a decade there. I was a color timer. The big thing that I focused on was I really loved all the wacky, crazy artists that came into the lab with these impossible projects. Ironically, I'm still working with some of those people. Really brilliant animator, David Russo, was somebody that I had taken under my wing back then. And he'd stopped making movies. And for about 10 years, and one day his wife was like, I don't really like this person you become. I really want the crazy artist back. And so he called me up and he's like, I want to make films again. I want to do animation again. Well, the way he had done things was with film cameras. So he had this giant Rackover Mitchell that he used as a field camera. It was ridiculous. Oh my God, there's Lori.
Hi, wow.
How's it going?
You won't remember me, but I had her too.
Anyway, so David Russo calls me up and he's like, I need to take this thing digital, right? We don't have the film labs anymore. And so I've been working with him. It's amazing, like how somebody that could be so technical and do this like ridiculously complicated. I mean, he did these animations that he literally mapped out all million frames. Like every frame was on a piece of butcher paper. And so we're trying to get that old workflow to work with a DSLR and an Adobe Premiere. And he's literally calling me every night and just like, I broke it again. So anyway, it's been super fun to carry this thing forward. My day job now is I work at the University of Washington. I run a team that makes videos for online courses. We make a lot of videos for online courses. I think we're on track to make somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 videos this year, and there's 4 of us. And so it's kind of a factory, it's kind of a machine, but it's kind of awesome too. Online videos, I mean, if you guys are taking online courses, aren't always the sexiest thing. Sometimes they are though, and so if the content requires it, then we'll run off and do location videos or location shoots or interviews or whatever we could do to make it interesting. Right now we're doing a lot of programming classes, not a lot I can do to make that very sexy. So it's one of the reasons we can crank out a lot of materials. But one of the greatest things that's happened with my work is that to make it scalable, I've been using a lot of contractors, which at first I felt kind of sheepish about. So if you work as a contractor, you're responsible for your own taxes and benefits and all those things. And so I felt bad when I would hire people, but they actually, I've been hiring really great people, really good artists, really good editors, and they like having a day job without having a day job. So it's this kind of like fine line between just like, well, I don't actually work for the man, I just sort of work for the man. And that's been really great. And also the discipline of like cranking out that much material. When I hire these editors to come in and work for me, I'm just like, I will make you a really, really, really efficient editor. Because to crank out that much material, you have to be super organized. And there's still plenty of room for creativity, but it's so much better. And it's affected my own work on the side. When I sit down to do something even simple, right? I have all those procedures in place, and I know exactly where everything is and know where it goes. And then lastly, I've been also directing a documentary on the side. Those of you who were here last year will see the same trailer that I showed last year. So it's a feature-length documentary about the Richard Hugo House, which is a writing center in Capitol Hill in Seattle, that was in this funky old building that was falling down. And the owners demolished the building and are building a new building. I was friends with the founding director of the Richard Hugo House, and so we made this sort of poetic, observational kind of documentary about the history of Hugo House and kind of the future. A little bit about the future. But anyway, that film is currently in post. We've been working on it for over 2 years. Right now, the soundtrack is with Steve Fisk, music producer, who's who's doing the sound design and mix for us. And we're still working on a little bit titles. So we hope to have that out or start submitting to festivals this fall. So that's my babble. Sure.
We're having rolling introductions to each guest. So we're going to let you each sort of talk for 5 or 10 minutes about your career and your work as a media creator. And then after sort of each person has had a chance to say a little bit about themselves, we'll open it up to Q&A for everybody.
So our next participant is Andrea Andy Goodman, who is a MediaWorks alumni, or alumna, thank you very much, who graduated from Evergreen in 2013, as well as holding a certificate in nonprofit management from the University of Washington. So I'm really curious about your youth and community director at Gage Academy of Art, developing programs in racial equity that aim to provide free arts programming citywide. So please help me welcome Andrea Goodman.
So yeah, I work as the director of youth at Gage Academy of Art, which is an art school. It's a medium-sized nonprofit in Capitol Hill in Capitol Hill in Seattle. So my job there is to provide mostly free arts programming for teens all over Seattle. And at our Capitol Hill location, we focus mostly on providing free arts education like drawing, painting, and sculpture every Friday night at the Teen Art Studio. And we provide art instruction, food, and the supplies. And we work on mostly supporting LGBTQ a youth in our location there, and that's about 40 youth that come to us every Friday night. And then a lot of my work is to then reach out to other organizations in the area to provide free arts. So we have a partnership with the Bellevue Art Museum, and then I just created a partnership at the South Park Community Center. And a lot of my work for the last probably year and a half has been working with the South Seattle area to figure out what is best for that community and what they would want in that community. It's a location that is been redlined, which means like it's pretty hard to get to, and it's this weird thing that happens when you go there that it feels really rural, like very isolated, even though it's the middle of the city, because it's just really forgotten. So I've been working with that community to figure out a way of providing arts education there. So recently got about $250,000 to provide free arts education in that area. So a lot of the work that I do is to figure out, work with communities to figure out what kind of like would meet them and how to build access to them, and work with artists who are, creative teachers to build curriculum that's like really fun and exciting, and to provide that education. I've been working with other institutions like the Northwest African American Museum, Seattle Art Museum, the National Art Education Association as well. There's like different exhibitions that will come in, and they will ask myself, and then I'll hire teaching artists to be like, okay, like the Refiguring History Museum just opened, and we want to develop something where people can come in and deepen their arts practices in a free and accessible way. So we'll kind of think through that. Okay, so if we want to target South Seattle, what does that mean? How can we make it as low barrier as possible? So that would mean kind of setting up scholarships, but making sure that those are low barriers. Thinking about transportation, and then also the kind of art that we're providing. And I'll show, can I?
Yeah, let me fire this up. Ryan, were you going to show a video?
Yeah, I have a
Should
clip
we
as
do
well.
it at the
Sure.
At the
end?
Yeah, let's do it after.
Or else we skip over that?
We could have played some audio on it. What happens is it makes you, I know,
Okay.
Thanks.
So this is
representing an audio component.
So this is a youth curators program at the Northwest African American Museum, and what we did is learn the history of the Central District, which is a part of Seattle that is historically a black neighborhood that's being gentrified more and more. So the Northwest African American Museum work in the museum, learn about the history, and then it depends on who they're bringing in to do it. But this one, we wanted to create artwork that was displayed at the museum. So for this particular partnership, what they did was they learned about, they focused on one building or neighborhood or block, and that and they learned about the history. They talked to the people in that block or that building, and they made a map of the Central District. And they talked, there's a huge Black Panther history, and so they got to learn from the Black Panthers in that neighborhood. And they worked in our studio that's in Georgetown, which is again in that South Seattle area. This is some pictures of them making some art. It's hard to like capture what, you know. And yeah, so it was called Intersections Finding True North. And you can read more about this. This is them. And then they did a public, so then it was exhibited in their gallery, and then they talked about what they learned, and they had this beautiful map, this like it was not like a real map, it was just this very, as you all are probably very familiar with, this very kind of narrative, representational map. So that's the kind of work that I'm working really hard to support. Right now I'm working on finding funding and working with I'd say like tech companies in Seattle, because there's a lot of money there, and being a nonprofit, we are constantly trying to find ways of kind of aligning ourselves with money. And Seattle's dealing with a lot of change, and a lot of money is coming in, but not necessarily to the arts. So I am just constantly working with my executive director to find creative ways that we can kind of build community around that. And so Adobe is something that I've been having my eyes kind of set on, and coming from this background, thinking about like, Gage is very analog, we're very everything we have our hands on. But people are really wanting this like the STEAM, this like science, technology, you know,
engineering.
Yeah, and math. Like that's like, yeah, like you know, I'm working a lot with grants, which you will all be very soon getting to know a lot about. But all like grants that usually funded us are now just obsessed with that. And so how do we shift to include that? So been working to do hand-drawn animation and aligning ourselves with tech companies and about how these like hand motor skills are important for your future workers, and then adding social justice on it. So all these things that I feel like Evergreen taught me how to grab all this stuff and make it important for the people who might need it. So anyway, we can talk about that later.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, so if anyone else wants to pull up a website or a clip, this is fired up.
I was just thinking, you could go to KUOW and look for segregated Seattle. Why is Seattle so segregated? That would be something I could play to kind of play off of what Andrea was just talking about.
Cool. All right. So our next, what's that?
This is as bright as it gets. I don't know, because the other lights are like behind the screen.
Okay. So we're doing kind of rolling introductions, and should I go back? Should I just go down to Kai then? I can't
Sure.
remember who came first, or do you want to go to Jamala? Would you like to go next since you got your KUOW? I don't.
Go for it, Kai.
Okay.
Go.
All right.
Got you, buddy.
So we have Kai Tillman, who graduated in 2010, is a cinematographer and director living in Portland. Kai's films are used to create awareness about specific issues and promote respect for difference. Red Leaf was shot in Cuba and screened at the Locarno Film Festival, Canby Film Festival, Lead Queer Film Festival, Trans Pride Short Film Festival, Fringe Festival, and the Musée des Arts Modernes de Montreal. What's this? Workshops with Abbas Kiarostami and Werner Herzog. Excellent. So we are going to hear more from Kai. Thank you for coming, Kai. Welcome him.
So thanks for having me. I kind of represent, I think, more the wild card, the freelancer. After graduating in 2010, I kind of jumped into how to survive and be free at the same time. So I started a production company and basically took on any project I could to learn skills to kind of be marketable as a camera person. And that led me to kind of building this production company and working, I'd say a little bit, it feels like being a journalist in some ways because I'm doing projects from every topic that you could imagine. And some of the stuff that I've worked on over the years have been really like not very political, working with like Intel and Nike and things like that, and then also extremely political. I did a series on microaggressions, which I'm going to show a little clip on that, and I just sort of navigate this world of being, how do I explain it, like making money and surviving, but also being a creative professional. And I've done that, it's for 8 years, and I've been able to make enough money to live, and also become a pretty skilled cinematographer. When I was in Evergreen, the things that I learned a lot was audio engineering. And that's when I graduated, I was like, I'm gonna be an audio engineer and go out in the world, and I don't know exactly how I got sucked up into the camera department, but it's been really incredible to sit through hundreds and hundreds of interviews, maybe even 1,000 at this point, I don't even know. And then start from being sort of like fake it till you make it and very kind of confused at how to survive after graduating to feeling really confident, like, and knowing how to do professional lighting, knowing how to produce a video from scratch, from idea, from meeting a client to having a piece manifest. And so it's been kind of an interesting journey the past 8 years. I also recently started sort of moving away from documentary and going a little bit into narrative fiction, which is a whole other animal. And in some ways, I think documentary is really interesting because it's kind of like hunting. And I feel like fictional narrative is like growing or having a farm. And you have full control, maybe as much as you think that you do. And they're both really interesting, for sure. And I think that like in the future, I can imagine that I would do or be more interested in the narrative fiction because I like the combination of real stories that you kind of fictionalize in the way that you would like to see it happen. So I did this workshop, 2 workshops in Cuba. One was with Abbas Kiarostami. I'm not sure if anyone here knows who he is. He's an Iranian director who passed away recently, really incredible. And he does a lot of docu-fiction, I guess is the way it's called, where you work with non-actors and kind of bring in that rawness of a non-actor and fictionalize something that maybe you don't bring a set or create a set, but you take what you already have and kind of impose a fictional story on top of that. And so when we were in Cuba, we had 10 days to, we were placed in a location that we didn't know anyone or anything, and we had 10 days to write, direct, shoot, edit, and deliver a final product to this really famous director, and that was terrifying. And also in Spanish. But it was really interesting to kind of open my eyes to his aesthetic of like what's already there and what sets are already built, what can I just tweak a little bit and already keep these people or capture like someone in their essence and kind of just fictionalize it. And so the film that I guess that was talked about in my biography was a little boy who basically built a fort to explore his gender. And the fort was already there. And I sort of just walked around this little village for a couple of days, and these little kids hung out with me the whole time. And at the very third day or whatever, this kid was like, I want to be in your film. And so it was just a natural thing that manifested, and he was very, and I guess the thing, thinking about like non-actors, it's really interesting to see like how talented people can be even if they haven't trained in acting. And so that was a really interesting experience. So yeah, I have leaned into fiction a little bit, and it's been a very interesting process, extremely exhausting and long hours. Documentary is also exhausting, but I feel like there's a way in which it's more exhausting in the edit than it is maybe in the field. Fiction tends to be like 16-hour days, and you overexhaust your actors, or if it's a non-actor, they don't know what they're getting into, kind of thing. And so, yeah, let's see, anything other. I've also been working with this organization called Outside the Frame, which is it's based in Portland, and it works with homeless and marginalized youth, teaching workshops and that has been really powerful experience. It's sort of 50% social work and 50% filmmaking. And I've learned a lot about trauma, a lot about people being in the position to tell their own stories instead of that sort of voyeurism of someone else telling a story. So it's really healing, especially if the interviewer has experienced the same thing as the interviewee. So that's, yeah, I'm really grateful to work sometimes with that organization. And then also with my production company, I have made it a point to hire people who don't represent the, I guess, I don't even know what the number at this point is for who dominates the film industry. I think it's, what is it, like 96% men? I don't know. But I've really made a point to hire that whatever 4 or 5%, and seek out to bring people up to skill. Because I think that's the point, is that a lot of people will argue that, well, I try to hire the best, and if there isn't the person in the group that represents the minority, and they're not the best, then I won't hire them. And my argument is like, how does someone become skilled? Is they get opportunity, and they get mentored by people who look like them, which is perpetuating the same power structure. So anyways, not to get too political, that's kind of,
Show a clip.
I can wait till the end and show,
Okay,
yeah,
we'll
that's
clip
fine.
at the end.
Okay, so our next guest that we're welcoming is Tina Knoll, and my my glasses. Tina graduated in 1994 and is the founder and chief creative officer at Large Media, a full-service audio production house in downtown Seattle. She spent 10 plus years in broadcast journalism, managing talent and winning awards. Awesome. Executive producer at Air America, long-form producer at CBS News. And let's see, Edward R. Murrow award-winning coverage of the 2007 Pennsylvania primary. Thank you, Tina, for joining us. Let's welcome her. Thank you.
Hi. I wanted to start with my very first program at Evergreen was called Society, Social Change, and Expressive Arts. And that lady over there was my teacher. So I want to share with you that my very first evaluation, and I hate to put you on the spot, I broke out in hives the night before, and I was so nervous, and I came into your office and you poured me tea, and really kind of changed my life. So thank you for that. So I grew up, and I made it, graduated into and I started my career really in theater and working with kids and teaching kids theater. And Evergreen does this thing to you, as you all probably know, that keeps your heart in social change and media and things that matter in the world. So as I was sort of progressing out of acting, I was hired to be a radio personality for a kids radio station out of Seattle called Kidstar. And it was super cool because it was like NPR for kids. We had kid cast members, there was kid reporters. It was everybody it was really creative. It was so great. But they failed, they went under. So as they went under, it was so sad. I know, it was so great. I want to recreate it, so all hope is not lost. I do want to recreate it. But Radio Disney came along, and as I have done this teeter-totter thing in my life about like kind of crazy corporate, because there's money over there, and like doing what's better in my heart and soul, I went to Radio Disney for a short time. And I had a fight with the program director because I wouldn't take kids to the circus. And I had this big fight about the elephants and how kids care about animals. We can't. So they hated me. So I left there and ended up at KUOW Radio in Seattle, where I was lucky enough to work with Dave Ross. I'm skipping some parts because I don't want to bore you. But I worked with Dave Ross, who was really one of the, I would say, best talk show hosts, like moderate, intelligent, kind, thoughtful, and we were able to do a topic an hour and like digest it with callers and a guest, and it was very interesting for me, and we had a 3-hour show. And as what happens in radio is when you're doing something well and you're having a good time and they're paying you nothing for it, they add on shows. So President Reagan's son, Ron Reagan, the progressive, not to get political, just in context, Ron Reagan came and wanted to do a show, so I produced his too, in addition to Dave Ross's. So then I had 4 hours a day of radio, and they didn't pay me anymore. And it was really exciting still because I had 4 hours of long-form news coverage of all sorts. And so anyway, as time went on, CBS News, we were an affiliate, and I went to New York and kind of met everybody and hoped that they would eventually hire me, and they did. And so I moved to New York and worked there for a year, and I found that a year and a half, I was there a little over a year. Again, I was pulled back to long-form coverage. Like, I really like this idea of getting into a story and looking at things from all different sides. And at CBS News, they would literally hand me a full-page New York Times story and say, okay, find this doctor who discovered this gene for blah, blah, and we need about 10 seconds of that guy. And I'd be like, how are we telling this? This is so irresponsible. Because you get on the air and you'd be like, we cured cancer, and this guy says so, and story over, on to the next. And like, that wasn't it, and it was driving me crazy. Not to say anything bad about CBS, it's just, you know, sort of the nature of that beast, of this sort of fast-moving, short sound. So anyway, I got a little bit anxious there, and they didn't like me either because I was getting loud about we can't do this is irresponsible. So anyway, I got lucky again because Ron Reagan got a job with Air America and called me when he signed a 3-hour talk show again. So I got to stay in New York, work with him, and do all the things I loved that I was doing at the kids radio station back there, like long form coverage, super creative, all these cool people. And then they went under. So as Air America went under, I really started realizing that I wasn't really going to be able to work for somebody else and do all the stuff I really want to do. So I began freaking out and trying to figure out how I was going to do that. And I I traveled around the world for a little bit with CBS News travel editor and was kind of mulling over this podcast thing. So this is about 2010 when podcast was just kind of starting to be a thing. And I realized that that was really a place that would make a lot of sense for somebody like me who wanted to explore my creativity, get back in long form coverage, not have to work for somebody else. And so I began to build large media. So we really launched the company probably in 2012. And now it's 2018, and I'm still freaking out. But I hired an Evergreen graduate full-time, was my first producer, and my sister, who's also an Evergreen graduate, has just now come, and she's running the business side of my company, and I'm running the creative side. So we produce podcasts for thought leaders, celebrities, and brands. And we launched a network of podcasts that are all hosted by women. And that space is a little different than our other one. And in the podcast hosted by women, we are now able to curate our own content. So the other side, people pay us to create content. So we work with a chef, we work with a hospital, all kinds of different brands and things. So that's kind of how we pay for the network side. And the network side, we get to find people that want to create, and then we just do that alongside with them, and we fund that side of our work. And all the shows are hosted by women, but they don't necessarily, the audience isn't women. So the audience is everyone. And the idea for that is because when I was in radio, I was told that women would listen to men's voices, but men wouldn't listen to women's voices. And I believed it. I literally was like, well, okay, I guess I'll be a producer then. Like, I just lived in this, like, world where that just was how it was. And then as I started waking up a bit, I think, and realizing that I wanted to amplify women's voices and create a place for really great content, great storytelling, interesting subject matter on all kinds of different places, that's when we started creating Large Network. So we have about 4 shows, 2 that are out, and about 4 other shows that are in pre-production right now. So those will launch in the coming weeks.
Do you want me to pull up your company website?
Sure. Why not? We just did a largemedia.com. Yeah. So our kind of breakout show is a show called Mouthy. We have 2. One called Successfully, that's run by this woman who's kicks your butt on accountability, and then another, she's really great. Her name's Keita Williams. And then our other show, Mouthy, Messy, Mandatory, just got picked up. That's Mouthy, Messy, Mandatory, Successfully. So Mouthy, Messy just got picked up by the Young Turks Network, and so we're doing a weekly television, a linear satellite newsy kind of talk show with those guys. It's really good. I really love that one. And then Katie does Successfully, and then these ones are kind of coming. So yeah.
Good at
That's
titling.
neat. What's that?
Good at titling.
Oh yeah, thanks. And then it stops there. That's me and my sister. But anyway, yeah. So that's us.
All right.
It's a great website.
Thank you. No.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
All right. Oh.
Jamala, and then you can speak. So our final walking introduction is to Jamala Henderson, who's a newscaster with KUOW Public Radio. She has been there since 2004. Is that right? Okay. why don't I
I'll
put my-
clarify everything when you're.
Thank you. I
finished.
know, right? So I'm reading a very bad, rough draft of a bio.
Oh, it's all
In
good.
1998, you graduated Evergreen, focusing on film, video, and media studies, working in video production and pursuing radio at the University of Washington's TV station. Started as a volunteer host in Bellevue and became a broadcaster at the Evergreen Radio Reading Service, a radio reading service for the blind.
Mm-hmm.
Currently pursuing a Master of Communication in Digital Media. Please help me welcome Jamala Henderson.
So first, I got to ask my illustrious panel here. I heard a couple of you guys say not to get political. Are we not supposed to get political here? Because unfortunately for me, my story is political, whether I can help it or not. So
I'm
just
comfortable there.
FYI,
Somebody
it's gonna, you know, it deals with a lot of stuff. So let's see, where do I start? Ruth Hayes, my teacher when I was here at Evergreen. I always love seeing you when I come back. She was animation. I was doing MediaWorks in 1997, 98. And I think I entered that program scared as a tiny little bunny, and I came out with some confidence and ended up doing an internship very close to here at the Department of Information Services. So I started out in video production, honestly, and did a lot of audio for them, which ended up in me being really interested in radio. So by the time I decided to move back up to Seattle, I ended up at UWTV and at the University of Washington. And what I was doing there actually was encoding video for them for a big, huge research channel / website that they had. And next door to them was what is now KEXP, but was then KCMU, I believe. And so one night, they were going to have their annual Christmas party, and they wanted everybody on staff there to be at the party. And to do that, they had to make sure that somebody was manning the board. And because I had some previous audio experience, they came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to man this board for one night?" And I was like, "Sure." And while I was sitting there in the room all by myself, I had this epiphany: radio. I want to do radio. I don't know why, but it was like a little tingle, and I was like, I must pursue this somehow. So what I ended up doing was taking a 6-week class at KBCS in Bellevue at the time. They were KBCS Bellevue Community College, but they transferred over to college. So I did a 6-week class and ended up doing radio volunteering for their show Roots and Branches, but also doing like middle of the night radio hosting, playing all kinds of world music, whatever they had on the shelf. It was a lot of fun. And I loved it. I loved it, even though I was getting up at I think I would leave my house at 11:30 at night and then probably come back at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And that's the way it started. After that, I got a job at the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, like she had said. And what that is really an amazing service that unfortunately kind of got gutted. They are a library for blind and partially sighted people where they have Braille books, but they also have books on audio tape. And they send these books, and I'm pretty sure it's not audio, because they used to send out cassette tapes. I'm pretty sure it's all done by media files now. But people who are blind and partially sighted can sign up for this service and have audio books that they check out like any regular library to have read to them. And so they have a pretty big volunteer program of about 400 people. And while I was there, what I did, they had what was called the Evergreen Radio Reading Service. And it was a service that actually had live broadcasts to people who were patrons throughout the state. And so we were carried on like second audio channels, and I think KUOW carried us at the time, so that people all the way over in Eastern Washington who are part of this library could actually listen to us and volunteers reading the newspaper live every night from 6 to 8. And so, live means live. Something happens, you hear it, somebody starts laughing and can't stop, you hear that. And that had happened like several times. It was unfortunate, but we had a lot of fun there. And while I was working there, some people from KUOW were actually volunteers, and so I got to know some people there. And And also, one of my best friends, who is still one of my best friends today, lost her job and started volunteering at the Talking Book and Braille Library. And she ended up getting to know the KUOW people and doing an internship with them. Her name is Phyllis Fletcher, and today, I have to say, she is the West Coast Bureau Chief of NPR. And she's amazing. She's always out there to help people. So I got at least some links to people if you need to know, talk to people about news, whatever. But so she ended up getting an internship. And then when they decided at KUOW to have a second channel that was only streaming, it wasn't being broadcast anywhere, she said, "You should apply for this job." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And she's like, "Yeah, you should do it." So she sat me down, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen, any of you seen The Office, the movie? So she sat me down and she was like, "So look, this is the guy that you're going to deal with. Have you seen that movie, The Office?" And I was like, "No." She's like, "Go watch it. Watch the manager. This guy, the programming director, is exactly like that guy." And I was like, she was right. I did my interview and he was exactly like that guy from The Office. So I got through that. He liked my audition, what have you, and I ended up working there part-time, working at the Talking Book and Braille Library part-time. Eventually they hired me and Phyllis full-time there. Phyllis went on to do amazing, great things, and I went on to do a lot of lateral moves. I've been a weekend host, I've been a reporter, I've been a producer for a particular show that went down in flames, but has a very close place, like a very warm place in my heart, because it is where I discovered what I really am passionate about. But my last sort of job there has been as a newscaster and reporter. And kind of like what you were saying, the reporting part for my side of it, because I was always in the building and couldn't really get out to do a lot of field reporting, it ends up being 1 minute to 45-second stories that you have to write really quickly. You have to get anywhere from 15 to 20-second cuts from people to kind of illustrate what it is that you're talking about. And that becomes a daily grind. So basically what happened is, technically right now I am still employed, but my job will be ending on July the 2nd. So what they did, and I don't know if any of you have seen any of the coverage about, there was very little, but The Stranger did an article about why they decided to eliminate us. And what they did was they eliminated 7 of us. They had the morning show and the afternoon drive, and they eliminated all of our positions, producers, newscasters, hosts. And because what they did was they consolidated the host and news job for the morning and the afternoon, and they changed some of the jobs around to have news producers, so basically producers with news backgrounds, which we didn't have before, and then they made another position for a morning reporter, somebody who could go out and gather news as things were happening. Now, it was a very interesting strategic move that they did. They happened to do it right after we had all decided to unionize, and before we actually started bargaining for our contracts, which they are allowed to do. They are allowed by law to make any changes to their, management structure, their overall structure, to their, people who work there, whatever they want. But we are still allowed to be covered by SAG-AFTRA, as who we unionize with, as people for the effects of what happened. So what I did was I took a leave of absence until July the 2nd, because I had so much sick time and that I wasn't going to get paid out. I decided if I don't use it now, I'm never going to use it. But it is technically a medical leave. So that's why I'm here today. In the fall, I had started grad school at the University of Washington, their communications leadership program. And what I'm studying there basically now is storytelling, user experience, and what else? Content strategy and things of that nature. And it's very interesting. I'm getting my eyes opened a lot to a lot of different ways in which jobs in today's world are being titled, and how networking works, and how you can't get a job if you just apply for it via the web. You got to talk to people, you got to know people. And what I'm finding is that my life is going full circle. So before I got to Evergreen, I was a musician. I played the viola. I wanted to be a classical instrumentalist. And work on not only announcing for something that I love, which is something that I started doing in my youth, but also to help create community around the arts and arts organizations, because they are looking for ways to help people find their way into not only classical music, but the arts, and trying to understand how to make that inclusive, which, comes from a very problematic place in the begin with, because it's all Western European sort of composers and whatnot, but there's still a lot of ways that people can understand this sort of basic, fundamental arts place and use that in everyday, life today, I believe, because I believe that the music training that I got as a kid helped me in a lot of ways, in more ways than just being a musician. So the one political thing that I will sort of outline for my journey at the station that I am currently being paid by but not working at, it was basically things really started to change in a couple of very interesting ways from the standpoint of my being a part of that team, and also the way the news and technology has changed the news that we are now delivering to people. Technology basically, if the 24/7 cycle sped up how much news that you need to be doing and producing and putting out, technology, social media, and everything else sped it up even further. Now we have to have not only a lot of content coming out, but a lot of content coming out on different channels, which are supposed to be differentiated in every single way that you can think of. So if you're putting something out on Twitter, it can't be the same as on Facebook. If you're putting something out on Instagram, it can't be the same as on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. And you've just got a lot more work that reporters and producers are doing in order to get a product out, and it's stressful, to say the least. On top of that, since Trayvon Martin happened and on, with the coverage of all of the people of color who have been brutalized by police and unfairly targeted for different things, being a person of color and being one of the only people of color in that environment became very difficult. And because of that, it made it, I'll just put it this way, I'm done with journalism. Like, I appreciate every single person who is black, brown, and doing journalism, but it is not easy to be a person of color in journalism today. And that's all I'm gonna say about that, because it's not made easy by your colleagues. It's also not made easy by watching people who look like you have a difficult time in the state of what is here, America, in our country. Thank you, Childish Gambino. I watch This Is America every single day to kind of, process things. And that's all I'm gonna say. I'm done.
I think I found the story you wanted to share. Do you want me to put that up?
You gonna start with mine?
Yeah, we'll start with yours and then circle back. Okay, so is this it? Why is Seattle so racially segregated by Jamala Henderson?
Yeah, this story, one of the great things that did come out of KUOW was a program that they started doing called, was it Local Wonder? And so what that was the audience would ask specific questions, and the online audience would vote on it, and whichever question won would end up getting pushed to a reporter to go out and do some reporting on, and the question would be answered. And because they were audience-driven questions, they'd get a lot of play. People would tweet them, share them, analyze them on Reddit to the nth degree. And what ended up happening here was somebody asked the question, why is Seattle so racially segregated? So if you look at how Seattle is sort of separated in a way that you look at everything north of the Ship Canal is mostly white and some Asian. Everything south of the Ship Canal, yes, can be very, It's where a lot of the people of color, South Asian, Black people, other folks live sort of today, and most of those people have even been pushed farther south to like Renton, Kent, and beyond. So this is something that I did before a really wonderful man came out with a book that kind of breaks down how the government was actually involved in creating a lot of redlining in a lot of different areas, which meant people of color could not buy houses in certain areas. So what you had was people being pushed to specific places in Seattle because they simply would not be allowed to buy a house in North Seattle or, say, Ballard or what have you. So that's what this story is about. I think this, you don't have to play the whole thing. I think the whole thing maybe be like 8 minutes or something. So if you want to, oh, it's only 6.
Early in the last century, people of color were banned from living in certain parts of Seattle. The laws have changed, but remnants of this racial divide exist to this day. This prompted a listener's question for KUOW's Local Wonder.
This is David Newman. I live in Beacon Hill in Seattle. And my question is, why is Seattle so racially segregated?
To answer David's question, we sent out KUOW's Jamala Henderson.
In order to understand why Seattle seems or feels so racially segregated today, you need a glimpse at the city's past. It's a particular part of its history that people don't exactly enjoy talking about. Seattle is sunny and warm the day I meet up with University of Washington history professor Jim Gregory. We stand on the edge of East Montlake Park, where I can see boaters and their yachts motoring under the drawbridge and through the cut. It's truly one of the most beautiful areas of Seattle, but according to Dr. Gregory, it also represents the city's ugly history of racial segregation.
The Ship Canal is a profound barrier between North Seattle and the rest of Seattle, but also between white Seattle and multiracial Seattle.
He says the physical barrier has actually served as a moat.
A literal moat that has defended, in a symbolic sense, white Seattle from desegregation.
That's because to the north, neighborhoods were very white, and blacks and Asians were pushed to live south of the Ship Canal. In the early 20th century, it was legal for white people to ban blacks and Asians from buying houses in certain neighborhoods. White neighborhood groups and realtors did this by inserting what they called racial restrictive covenants into property deeds.
So other neighbors could sue a homeowner who decided to sell to a person of color, or in many cases Jews were also prohibited in neighborhoods.
Adrienne Bailey remembers what that time was like for people of color. She's 62 and has been an activist and used to work for Seattle Central College. As a child, she was given access to many parts of Seattle that her friends could never see.
My mom was a domestic, so that meant we had to go where white folks were. And me being the youngest, a lot of times I always had to go with her. So I always saw what the other world was.
But later in life, she learned about the barriers she and others had to endure. For instance, Bailey knew by word of mouth which realtors would and would not rent to people of color. And when it came to buying a house,
Black people always had to use shields to buy a house.
What do you mean by shields?
White people. If you were going to buy a house, it would have to be the white person would have to be the one to sign off on it first. And then that person would turn around and sell it to you. You know, it was common practice.
Those common practices meant blacks in Seattle were pushed to live in specific parts of the city, and blacks and people of color were also deprived of access to loans and mortgages, a discriminatory practice known as redlining. Today, things are different. Because of steep housing prices, African Americans are being pushed out of the very neighborhoods they were originally forced into, and many have moved further south into areas like the Rainier Valley, Renton, and Kent. In the 70s, at its peak, the Central District was home to about 70% of the city's black population. Today, it's majority white, but there are those with deep family roots in the Central District who are doing their best to hang on to their homes however they can.
My grandfather purchased his first house here in the Central District in 1947.
Ine Wakoma is a photographer and a longtime resident of Seattle's central area. His grandfather and eventually other members of his family bought more houses in the area and lived in them for decades. including the house he lives in now.
My aunt died here. My great aunt died in the house next door. My great uncle died in the house across the street. Having property meant that family always had a place to stay. Meant that you always had people around you who were a part of who you are.
But over the years, financial problems hit Wacoma's family members, and many of them had to sell their homes and move. At their height, members of his family owned and lived in about 10 houses in the central area. Today, they have 3. For Wacoma, living in his grandfather's house gives him a sense of continuity of his family, from the past to the present and even to the future.
50, 75, 100 years in the future, will there be a place that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can stand in and know that generations of their families live their lives in that space?
What we see today as racial segregation in Seattle is the legacy of discrimination from the city's past. Seattle does have more areas now that are more integrated than before, but James Gregory says there are still a lot of complicated pieces of segregation that live on in Seattle beneath the surface.
Segregation tends to reinforce itself, tends to perpetuate itself. There are a lot of processes involved. Some involve overt discrimination and subtle forms of discrimination. And then there are also just aversions and attractions that go on.
In other words, there are still people who feel more comfortable living near other people who look like them. I'm Jamala Henderson for KUOW's Local Wonder.
This story was inspired by a question from listener David Newman. You can hear more stories from our Local Wonder series at our website, KUOW.org. And while you're there, leave us your local wonder about the Puget Sound region. If your question is selected, a KUOW reporter will investigate it.
So that has now... Thank you. I regret the university professor, his audio was just a little too hot, and I was like, I can't change that. But that has now become a whole team-wide thing at KUOW, where they're taking in questions from the audience and trying to produce more and more content based on what people want to know. So they are, doing really great, innovative stuff, and I will continue to watch from the wings. But that's how it is.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I'm going to circle back to Kai. Do you want to show a clip?
Sure. I have a hard drive.
Oh, cool. Okay, let's do it. And I missed when we were setting up yours, Ryan. Is it on this computer?
It's on the computer. It's on the
Okay.
desktop.
Once, I lived in a building that was named after a poet. He wrote poems about small towns and big rivers, about streams and bars. In the West, few writers then had audiences coast to coast. Actually, I think that the narratives were worn out. The same old stories of conquest to take over the frontier while the land belonged to indigenous people. Those stories were worn out. My apartment was above a cafe where poets and writers and actors performed on stage. We called the building Richard Hugo House. The building had once been a funeral home with a chapel. Afterwards, a couple of theaters took over, and by the time we moved in, we were starting a writer's center and naming it after Richard Hugo. It was my job to run the place. Writers felt comfortable here, like they could try out anything. I mean, you could spill stuff and no one would care. Physically spill, emotionally spill. Demolition is a sad prospect. You could scream, gentrification. People do. I understand. But think past the sentimental and imagine actually preserving the old place. Can you see it diminish next to the huge new buildings surrounding it? A spite house kept in defiance to the skyline? This is Seattle, a place to love whatever's left. My story is only one story. We remember places where we've lived, where we've moved from, and then the places are torn away. I guess we make art in the face of loss, out of those little fissures in our lives. With luck, we'll see some overlaps, some things coming into view, and we push things together until they make sense. That's what poets do. Only not exactly. Not exactly.
The first thing I'm going to play is just like a trailer for one of the microaggression series that I've been working on, and this one is on gender. There's 3 other, race and ethnicity, LGBTQ, and disability, and so they each cover the idea of like microaggressions based on Daryl Wingsu, who kind of came up with that word. And then the next film it's just a short part of a short film that I made. It's called Push Pink. And it's kind of weird to take that scene out of context, but I don't have time to play the whole thing. It's about a trans masculine person struggle with using public restrooms, and it later goes into sort of like a dark comedy and trying to get some questions unresolved, but that part doesn't get shown, so it's just like a clip from that. So we'll start with this one.
You just go to work every day and you never see anybody who looks like you. Because I'm usually the only black female electrician.
You have to think about so many things all the time. What to wear, how to speak, how to present yourself.
Women walk a very fine line when it comes to being aggressive or not too aggressive, being empathetic but not too empathetic. I think it makes the stress in anything we do higher than it should be, and certainly higher than it is for most men.
Who is now Mrs. Bill Johnson took a general home economics course. Not one which would lead to professional employment, but one which fitted her for that very important career of being Mrs. Johnson.
A veces siento y pienso que no voy a poder, no soy capaz eso es para hombres, que está todo tan separado, es tan sexista, que ya hemos adaptado este tipo de sociedad y hemos aprendido a vivir así.
It was okay for a man to be seen eating alone. It's perfectly fine. But when I transitioned to being a woman, it's as if like I had something wrong with me.
So we're going to open it up to your questions about the career paths and the work of these folks. We're going to ask that you come up to the mic, right, because then we can actually pick your question up in the videos. Yeah, so feel free to come up. Hopefully you all knew this was happening today, so you prepped all of your questions.
I have so many answers right now.
We're just waiting to come out.
So many.
Cool. This is intimidating. My question is for Ryan. I was wondering, how do you think that Evergreen prepared you for what you do, and what are kind of the challenges that you think Evergreen? I mean, not challenges, but what did you gain at Evergreen that you wouldn't have gotten at another school like at UC?
That's a great question, and I was thinking about that today, listening to everybody else talk, because it's really interesting to me how like seemingly circuitous, well, no, there's circuitous paths for my career, and I see it in other people too. It's like my first program at Evergreen was education. It was about education, and it was just like was the only core program I could get or whatever, that, or it seemed less stupid than everything else, right? But now that's what I do. So now, like, I went on this weird path through Evergreen that got me to where I am today. And I look back at my life and I don't see any mistakes. Like, it looks like, yeah, this is the trajectory. This is where all this led to, which I think is awesome. And that's one of the things that Evergreen taught me, was that kind of everything's on the table at all times. And you know, by keeping your eyes open and your heart open, you will discover amazing things that will take you amazing places. And I really think that a lot of this I learned here at Evergreen.
And I would hope that up to other folks too. Does anyone else have thoughts about how this, what was specific about Evergreen that helped prepare you for your career?
I think that Evergreen, for me, taught me how to think in a lot of ways, that how to take something and look at it from so many different angles, and that opened things up for me, especially in a newsroom, when so many things are coming at you and you have to question what's happening, and to hold on to your integrity and your sort of sense of, you kind of, for lack of better terms, some kind of moral compass or something about like what's sort of the right thing to do here, and to be open to listening to everybody else in the room. I mean, the seminar experience where you're reading a book a week and digesting it and talking about it for a week, that's a communication style and a way of learning that is profound, and you may not even know when you're in it how much that will serve you later on. To be able to sit in a corporate meeting and, you know, and shut up sometimes when you need to, and speak when you need to, and include the different perspectives and be willing and open to understand all those perspectives. That to me was really valuable as I've grown. But also, like, not being pigeonholed to do one thing, as you said, like your first core program, you do this, then you're open to doing all of these things. So by the time I graduated, to do things one way wasn't like a thing for me. Yeah. I wanted to do, like, there's all these different other things you can do. You don't have to just be a scientist or just to be a journalist. I learned this sort of diversity way of doing things and learning things that I think it opened me up to be more creative. I don't know if I'm making a lot.
No, that makes sense.
I
It makes sense.
Speak as well as I thought.
I was going to say, I second what you're talking about in terms of sitting in a newsroom and listening to people talk and kind of knowing where you're coming from versus what they're coming from, and just trying to make a very short piece, you know, a piece of information, but also realizing that there's so much more in, you know, context that really needs to surround the information that you're putting out. And I really feel like that served me as a person who was able to have very, you know, what I think is very good news judgment. And beyond that, though, I just keep thinking of this little exercise that I did in MediaWorks. I took Peter Randlett, who's no longer here. He gave us an audio segment where we learned how to put together 4-track compositions kind of in the audio studios and whatnot. And there's this one particular, because I was here right at the cusp of like magnetic tape going out of fashion and digital coming sort of into fashion. And he had us do this exercise where we had to create a loop with a piece of magnetic tape. And he's like, well, so cut the tape and then, you know, make a loop and then tape it together, but you have to make sure that, you know, the beats match. And I was like, screw that. I went to the, I think it was like a computer room, and I was like Deck 2 or something like that. It was something very close to what I use now, which is Adobe Audition. But I went in there, and instead of doing that, I made a loop with the digital program. And I've been using digital audio in some form or another ever since I started doing that here. And so whether or not, you know, I did get a really good, you know, feedback on that assignment, I have to say, because I was able to create a 4-track thing in digital form as opposed to doing it on tape. But there was just so many things here that allow you to make your own choices, make your own decisions, and go off and, you know, find what you really love and keep doing it. And nobody's telling you to stop. So I learned a lot from that as well, having a lot of autonomy here and being able to come up with your own projects and, you know, just take advantage of it as long as you can.
Yeah.
I don't know if, I think Naima Lowe doesn't work here anymore, but Naima Lowe was my education at Evergreen, and I am so thankful for her. I feel like I have to make a shout out to her because, but, oh, she was. Okay. So I, with one of my really close friends who's now an archaeologist, who took MediaWorks, there's so many ways in which this program has just informed like literally all my decisions. And it's mostly like, when I took MediaWorks, I had no idea what was happening for the first quarter. I don't think I talked to anyone because it was like this whole new language that was so entirely confusing. People were, like my peers, I felt like were speaking a different language. Like, and I was like, it was like sink or swim. And so for me, it was this moment of like, okay, I'm gonna try to figure this out and swim. But it was also this like, this real creative problem solving. And it was not only just like creative problem solving, but it was also like what you said, it was like finding your like moral compass, because there's like, we all know like media is this thing that you have such a huge responsibility for, so you have to like keep that grounded. And I find that in my workplace, like to toot my own horn, but like I find that I have that skill and not a lot of other people have that. And I think that like I really feel confident in that, and I feel like that skill wouldn't have been worked out so intensely if it wasn't for being in media, like film program stuff here, and yeah.
So like, it's interesting. I'm trying to think back to all the projects that I did and kind of how that informed where I'm at today, and it's so like. It's not non-traditional. Like I remember dumpster diving and field recording that, and learning about how people dumpster dive and then actually dumpster diving. And one of the things we did is a giant installation of just things we found, and we made a huge mountain in the middle of the class, and then a buffet of food that we created from things we dumpstered, and then simultaneously played like a soundscape of us dumpster diving. And
yeah, you did. Yeah, of course you did.
And the thing that's really interesting is I could see that being something that an art museum would pay for and curate. So it's like, you know, you have like no limits to, and it was really an interesting like exploration, and I feel like, just that in mind, all the projects felt limitless. Like I didn't have someone saying, well, this is how it's done, and this is the formula, now replicate it. It always felt like, okay, here are all the things that kind of like exist and ideas, and like the concept of biographical ethnographies, or like, or sorry, what was it? Ethnographic filmmaking, like experimental ethnographies. That was it's coming back. But like sort of like taking anthropology and storytelling, and another thing I did is this woman I knew, her husband had just passed away, and I sat with a field recorder and recorded her story for, it was like 4 hours just talking with her. And then I took, with her in this collaborative thing, we created this like experimental ethnography where we used her house and her story, and kind of like in this very emotional non sequitur way, like told that story of loss after being with someone for 35 years. And I remember just feeling like that it's such a powerful tool, that it's very cathartic, and it can be a thing that you can build relationships with people. And so Evergreen, like, I feel like if I was in which I did actually transfer over from another school, it didn't feel like I had that room to play, and that there was more, here are some old white dudes, like, memorize their canon and their legacy and replicate it. And here it felt really radical and like kind of a feminist undertone. And I will say, like, not to be like sending sort of the wrong message of like, then I left and I was successful. Like, I will say, like, I did kind of lack a little bit of technical skill when I walked away, and there was a bit of like hustle and fake it till I make it. And so, like, I think if there's some advice I would give is like really learn technical skill, like right now, like.
But I also feel like that's the stuff you can learn after, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I'm just talking from my
yeah,
experience,
totally,
like
yeah.
that, like when I left, like I'm like, okay, how do I have an apartment, how do I pay the rent, you know what I mean? And
totally.
it's and I want to do the craft of film, and so if that is the goal, like actually going into the field of filmmaking, learn something very specific, and that's not to deter from doing really like awesome things that are part of the whole media story or whatever.
I think you asked also about challenges, and I think being an Evergreen graduate, one of the challenges for me was stigma. That, oh, you pot smoked your way through college, or oh, you guys don't have grades. All that stuff definitely was a thing that through, you know, upon entry into sort of professional world, I got hit with here and there. It doesn't take long to switch people's thinking, because we learn here how to read, how to critically think, how to write. And to me, I felt like I had a very strong base when I graduated, but I think the stigma still existed a bit, so for what it's worth. I'm still going to buy a hat and a sweatshirt at the bookstore and wear it all.
Gooey Ducks.
Yeah, go Gooey Ducks.
Who else? Other students? Don't be shy. Now's your chance.
Hi. So my question, I guess, for all of you, but I'll have Kai start because I'm really interested in your perspective on freelancing. Like myself, I've recently built a Squarespace website, and I've done some work through channels of what I can think of as using like Craigslist, like creative gigs, you know, and stuff like that. And, you know, I've done stuff for people in different cities through doing that. And I've also tried to use the website Freelancer, and that site's like it kind of sucks, you know, to try to compete with people because it's all based on like points. And so my question is, when you graduated, and you started getting all the, you know, like actually paying your rent and everything by freelancing, how did you go about getting work and getting enough work to make any substantial income? Are there places you go physically, or did you use the internet? And how, I guess for everybody else, if you have any advice on that along those lines too, that'd be cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Just a question to you. What do you do? Like what?
I've done like audio work, video work, graphic design, like making posters for people's movies and stuff too. I just have like a range of stuff.
Skills,
Yeah.
Yeah. My so right now the industry is extremely flooded with camera operators. That's the truth. Like there's a lot, way more than the actual work that exists. Audio engineers, not so much. Like if and that's like.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like if I could, I do like where I'm at. I like the skill that I have, and I like being able to understand composition, lighting, and all of that, and professionally do it. But if I could maybe go back, I would say every time I've tried to, and I know I'm kind of diverting a little bit, but every time I've tried to hire an audio engineer, I have to go through 10 of them to find one available. They're always booked.
They're always booked.
Wow.
And they make the same amount of money as me. But that requires gear and things. So I think there's kind of like a couple of ways. There are people who have rich parents and they just give them what they need and they buy the most expensive stuff and kind of just thrive. And when they don't have work, it's fine. And that wasn't my story. I didn't have like a cushion from family or anything like that. So, I mean, it was hustle. That's my nature. Not everyone can do it. Like I literally contacted, I did everything from weddings to like, I would contact all these small businesses. And this is before people did, it was just when About Me videos were like starting and everyone had one on their website. And I just volunteered and I did a million free things. And finally my portfolio kind of built up and I had something to show, and then I would contact production companies. And it's really about networking. And if you can, just assist. That's what I would say. Get out there, find a cinematographer, find a production company and be like, I will be a PA. Like, be a PA for the first year. You'll learn so much. It's incredible. Be a assistant camera. Just really get on set, work for little, don't go in with an ego. Be humble and really like, so I think that would be, I wouldn't say like, I regret not doing that. Like, I feel like I had a harder path. If I could have just sort of been more humble and not so like survival mode, and actually just contacted cinematographers and assisted. So
yeah, I was gonna say two things. I was doing one of these actually last night at Seattle University. I got asked to be on a panel there because they have a small radio station that streams on the internet, and there were a ton of radio people on the panel, but most of them had been doing commercial radio, and one of the guys said, "Don't say no to anything ever." Now, I would put a caveat on that and just be like, do be, conscientious about what you're picking to do. But, when the opportunities come, and yes, with no money sometimes too, just go ahead and do it. Like what you're saying, just volunteer, do your best. But the other thing I would say is, we media people here at Evergreen started a Facebook group for MediaWorks people who have done media and whatnot through Evergreen. And if you join that group, you can always just put yourself out there and say, hey, I'm in MediaWorks, I've been doing this, I'm skilled in this and this and this, and I'm available for stuff. And it's also a great way to pick up, hopefully, some work, and you can network, can't get the word out, with other Evergreen alumni who have started companies, who are working in a lot of different places. And don't be afraid to also just contact some people and ask them what they're doing. Informational interviews, like don't ask for a job, but just ask them what they do. How did they get to where they are? What do they like the most? And where do they see these industries going? What kinds of new jobs have they discovered? That kind of thing. A lot of people will be flattered that you ask them that, and maybe they think of you and have you in the back of their mind when they know of an opportunity that will open up.
Some of you have that assignment due next Thursday in our program. We did the networking assignment. That's great. Giving props back to curriculum.
Yeah.
There you go. I was going to say that was actually one of our assignments first quarter was we had to create a network map and look at all the different areas in which we felt we had various networks that we could connect to talk with people to figure out where we're going next. So it is a very, very important part to have in your head. Who can I connect to? Yeah.
Literally how I started my business.
That's how I got my job.
I went, like, from my first job, from my first radio job, Tom Douglas was my host there. That show had taken a hiatus. I went to him first and said, so you want to do your show again? And I think I'm going to start a business, which I wasn't. I was freelancing. And he said yes. And then from that, everything else came from people that I knew, somebody that I worked with, somebody my mom knew, somebody my sister knew. Like, all of my work originally was founded on network. So.
Yeah, my career's been the exact same way. I've just leapfrog. I can't even remember the last time I applied for a job. It's all been just like word of mouth, this thing, and then I spent a few years purely freelancing and did exactly what you were saying, which is that I took everything in.
Yeah.
Because you never knew where the next job was coming from. So you might be on some free, I've just been on these like really, really stupid gigs. And then you start talking to the sound guy or, you know, a grip or a gaffer, and you strike up a friendship, and next thing you know, they're calling you up, and you're like, hey, it's a gig coming on. And then likewise, that's how I got my job at UW now. And then it's interesting also because I hire freelancers now. Some of my buddies are people that come to me through word of mouth. The kind of people I like to hire are really like generalists, like people that have done what you and I have done, where we take, you know, because I never know what's coming next, right? So whether it's a sit-down interview or it's a green screen or whatever crazy kind of stuff happens, I know I can pretty much, I've seen it all and I've done it all, and I can do it if I need to. And those are the kind of guys, girls that I like to hire as well.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I worked a full-time restaurant job when I got out because broke, and you know, had to figure out a way to be at my internship also 30 hours a week. And like now, as having interns, the ones who like I see like really are the ones who like show up and also have ability to like have clear boundaries and can advocate for themselves, and like are showing up and like really putting their all in. So I'd say like, yes, say yes to everything, but also like, please like advocate for yourself and
ask. Don't never be afraid to ask.
Yeah, never be afraid to ask. And but yeah, and then also like if you do meet people, like follow up on the people that they introduce you to, because that's how magic happens, I'd say.
Yeah, honoring those relationships is really important.
Yeah.
One last thing, like I kind of see it as like a 5-year path. Like the first year is like makes no sense. Everything's scary. You can't sleep the night before a gig. Like you mess up everything. Like it's just totally blurry. And then by the 5th year, you're a professional. And I mean, of course, you'll always learn things, but it takes about 5 years before you get to a point where you sleep the night before fully. and it's not intimidating new things because you've done everything. Like, so it's important to kind of like respect that you're not going to just like exit and be the best at everything. So, yeah.
Some more questions?
Hey, I'm wondering, how do you combat burnout, and also how do you get through creative blocks? Anybody can answer.
Time. I take time for myself whenever I feel like I can, and it's not easy to do, but you know, you also work at the UW, so the thing about the UW is you work there for a while, you get a lot of vacation time, it starts to rack up, you got sick hours. I mean, the benefits at the UW, they may not pay you that great, but the benefits are really good. And so it depends on where you're working, but within that system, but I would just plan my vacations and plan for some downtime just to be able to clear my head, because news right now is crazy. And, you know, listening to that all the time started to drive me a little crazy. So, and when it's your job and you have to be on it and thinking about it all the time, it does burn you out. So you just gotta really understand your cycles, know when you are, like, if you start getting really irritable, you're snapping at people, you are tired, it might be time to take a break, no matter what. So I just try to just stay very focused on how I'm feeling, what I'm doing, and is it time for a break? Just give yourself that time.
I think burnout's a really interesting thing because it sneaks up on you. You don't even know you're in it. I try to really be mindful of that with people that work for us. Who's right back there, Evergreen grad right there, who's our full-time producer, and my sister's over there who runs the company. But Sarah works really hard and she's editing a lot, and I'm conscious of because we like what we do. Like creatives get really like into it because you like what you do. We'll be into a project and I won't eat for hours, and I'll wake up from the computer and be like, oh my God, I haven't eaten in 4 hours or 5 hours. I'm starving, but I can't stop. So I think it's really hard for creative people to learn that. I'm just a cautionary tale because I really haven't mastered a way to balance out that burnout and sort of creative blocks. I mean, I guess I have in some ways. And I think, speaking to creative blocks, one thing that I'm learning even more now, even though I've been in it as long as I represent the old people of the group, as long as I've been in it, I still run up against not knowing that I'm going to hit a creative block. So learning to cut that off at the pass by, it sounds selfish, but like totally taking a hike or a bubble bath or a run or whatever the thing is that you do that's not involved in your work is really important, to try and head that off at the pass. And it's hard to do, again, because we like what we do and we need money and we have to work hard, but you will be a better you'll be a better editor, a better photographer, a better storyteller if you are able to create some of that balance, I think. I'm not very good at it, quite frankly.
Yeah, when my team is really busy and I'm just like focused and I'm there every day, and then if the work slows down a little bit, then I get sick and take a day or two off, and that's one of the ways I combat it. And I also think it's for me it's hiring well, right? Like I know what my strengths are and my weaknesses are, and so I try to hire people that are better at the things I'm not so good at. So I don't get so
Delegating,
Delegating.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Just thinking about that, when I first started, like I was a one-person band, like everything, and that is true. Like I would carry everything or do audio, and I remember just like wanting to drop at the end of the day. But yeah, that is true. Like now, I will never do anything without a production assistant, and I never produce either. Like I hate producing. I'm bad at it. I'm a creative. Like I don't even pretend or want to get good at that, and that's okay. Like I wasn't able to afford that always, and so I had to do everything for a very long time, and that really is you burn out. But actually I think it is important for everyone to go through that, because I think it's important to know all the roles, and like at least if you're going to delegate, you know what it includes. One thing that's also really important is to make sure, because you can get in the rat race and kind of forget about your own voice, and kind of you're doing other people's work all the time. At least that's what I do, is I manifest other people's ideas. And so it took me 5 years to kind of figure out that I hadn't been telling my own stories. And so I've made, in the past 3 years, a rule that I have to make one personal piece a year. And no matter,
that's good.
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
It's
That's
been
such
really,
a good one.
It's really important, and it's like changed everything for me. Like, because I'm less bitter about like, I have to. I mean, I'm very grateful. I don't want to sound like I'm not, but sometimes you get bitter when you can't tell your own stories. So it's really important.
Burnout is something that I'm still working on figuring out. Especially in a nonprofit, there's this scarcity mentality that happens, and so it's something that I'm actively trying to fight, where it's just like, we don't have enough resources. You have to be there every minute, and if you don't do this, then all those kids are not going to have the art, and then, so their lives are going to be ruined, and so I guess what I'm trying to do is like say no, which is really hard to do for a lot of different reasons. And then for, because I'm like now more of an administrator, I stare at a computer like all the time. So for me to go home and like pick up a camera and then edit film like is negative what I want to do. So that's my biggest creative block. So I've been doing like dance, like modern dance is like a thing that's like my new kind of art form that's like good for my body and a good way to, you know, so so I'm just like trying to be a more multidisciplinary like artist, which I feel like hopefully in my future I can transition to do more medias.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm still one of you guys.
A question, I can read it. Cool.
I was gonna ask Jamala this, but if anyone else wants to speak on it. So, listening to that, the Why is Seattle so racially segregated or so segregated piece, like you're doing the reporting, it sounds like. Are you also producing that piece? I guess I'm wondering, like, in those pieces that sound so like independently, like it sounds like you just made that by yourself. You know, how much do you find yourself working with other people on stories like that? And like, I guess for all of you, like how often do you find yourselves like working independently, and what roles do you like fill? And do you ever find yourself like, yeah, I made this, like, I mean, you talked about that a little bit in that last question, like, no, there's all these other people filling all these other roles and producing, but I guess that's
it's changing a lot at KUOW especially. I don't know what's going on at KBLU as much, but one of the things that has become really prevalent is working in teams. So we kind of went, I mean, traditionally we started out really as reporters going out, getting the tape, coming back, doing all the editing of it, and then putting it together ourselves. So we would pretty much do all the work ourselves, but then we'd have an editor come and go over the final product, tell us if we were missing anything, you know, help us to sort of cut things down, because a lot of times these things need to come in at like 4:30, or I think the maximum is 6 minutes, but they really are stressing 4:30, 4 minutes 30 seconds now for a lot of these pieces, what they call features. And so with that, yeah, I did all the research. I found all the people I wanted to talk to. I went out and I interviewed them. I took the pictures. I was a one-man band, and that's just kind of how people were doing it a lot. But nowadays, with social media and all the things that are going on, we have more people taking on different roles of producing, going out with people, taking pictures. They hired a photojournalist who's an amazing photog, and she just takes all these really great pictures of what's happening. She will go out with teams of people. So now they are starting to realize that they have to fill more roles, because reporters just can't be one-man bands anymore. It's a little bit too much to deal with when you're going out and doing all of that. So it's slowly changing. Teams are forming. People are working together a lot more. It's a lot more collaborative than it has been in the past. So one of the things to really consider is, you know, how do you work with others, and how well do you work with others? And something else somebody said last night was, you know, don't burn any bridges. And I was thinking, oh, I'm screwed, you know. But, you
I've
know,
lit a couple on fire.
yeah, so, I mean, it really is becoming a collaborative environment as, you know, time moves on, because there's so much to be done and so much to be put out in such a short time, no one can really handle it all themselves anymore. So, thank you for that question.
She said everything.
Oh, really?
I totally agree. I mean, that's exactly my experience.
I guess I have a quick follow-up.
Oh, okay.
Like, when you find yourself working in those teams and like even on different like subjects, do you ever get to pick who's on your team, or pick the subject that you're working with?
Well, there's some autonomy in picking the subject, but picking who you're working with didn't actually happen much. Totally. We got put into groups, and then we were tasked with coming up with big overarching questions of something that we wanted to be able to tell a bunch of stories on. But as time moved on, the strategy became more of being an outside-in organization, which means looking more towards audiences, at looking at what they want to hear, and including that into your overall editorial kind of process, to make sure that you're keeping your audience engaged at the same time that you're putting out the things that you really feel like you need, you know, audiences to know. So Yeah, did I answer that? Okay.
Any last questions? Is that Caitlin walking up? Okay.
I guess just any networking tips. You've covered networking a little bit, but I guess any just like big things that we should definitely remember about networking and trying to get, I guess, jobs after Evergreen.
If you ask, well, you should meet people face to face, and then when you do, you should meet them where they're at. Make it as convenient for them as possible, I'd say. Is a big one for me.
And following up is really, really important. Always following up. When I started my work at KUOW, a lot of people came to me asking me about my work because I was quite vocal and public about what I was doing, and almost everybody that came to me, I would say yes. I would have lunch with them or coffee or whatever, and I took note if they didn't follow up or let me know how it went or let me know what they were doing later. And the people that did stay in touch, I've hired so many people that just came to me like that, or I've referred them to other people. Like if you're gracious in those relationships, they really are important. And when you think about networking too, also what's important is like what you're doing in the world and what you're giving out. Like if you're gonna, go volunteer, go mentor somebody who's younger than you, go back to your high school or your elementary school, because there are relationships there that you probably don't even know that you were impactful about or that you could give back, and that may end up in work for you as well. So sort of looking at your input-output when it comes to networking, it's just not about always going out there. I don't know where Caitlin went. I saw you. There you go. I know it's not, for example, I worked with Caitlin. Can I tell this? Yeah. I worked with Caitlin's father. He was a fill-in host at KUOW. We stayed in touch. He now works for another organization that hired my company to do a podcast for them. Wow. I then got to meet Caitlin through him. We sat down, and I will hire Caitlin if she ever needs a job. So when you talk about that sort of full circle networking, a lot of that was because when David and I worked together, though he has very funny stories, we had a great relationship, and we followed up and we stayed in touch and blah, blah, blah. So all those dominoes were sort of linked. So I feel strongly about giving out to the world and also, following up and building relationships and all that stuff. And not just looking at it as like, I'm going to go meet with somebody because I'm going to get something.
Right. Yeah, like being authentic in your interactions with people. And I also think like the thing about like just being genuinely like curious about what people are doing is really important. I think it's sometimes tricky with networking because there's a lot of like socioeconomic and social capital that kind of happens depending on where people live or whatever. So I'd say maybe trying to not be trying to know that you're just wanting to develop, it happens the best when you're just trying to develop relationships and being genuinely curious about what people are doing. Because I know it can be really intimidating. I'm kind of shy and a little bit awkward. So, and in those situations, just trying to be as authentic with who you are and just building a friendship.
Yeah, I got two more things to add to that actually. One is think outside the box when it comes to networking. I didn't know that your dad was a fill-in host and whatnot. So, you can use your parents' friends, ask teachers, ask just people who you might not necessarily have thought of that could be, a possible connection. What are you doing? What's going on? And how's that working in your life? Don't, make friends with your classmates because literally those will most likely might be the person that you're working 100%. With later on.
Yeah.
And so keep in touch and, think about that. But also, I would also say, what was I going to say? Dang it, I forgot the other one. All right. Well, if anybody else has
I want to
anything.
say just one quick thing. I will always answer the phone, okay, email, whatever, for an Evergreen student.
Same.
So my company's Large Media, LARJ Media. Feel free. There's a little contact thing on our website. I will always answer to an Evergreen student. So please do know that you can reach out for work or internships, or if there is somebody on my LinkedIn that you want to meet or something like that, please do know that that's available to you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the other thing I was going to say too is, if you know somebody who knows somebody that you don't know, ask them for an introduction, and then always follow up. Be the first person to talk, to like contact that person after you've been introduced by a friend, because that will kind of show your initiative and that you're really interested in doing, understanding what they're doing and that kind of thing.
I'm going to interject really quick because it's 3, so I know some of you have to get on to your commitments and jobs, but I just want to first off, I want to thank the faculty that you've referenced, because I think without the faculty and staff kind of creating an environment, these 5 beautiful alumni wouldn't be here today, and today's kind of a tough day for a lot of staff, so I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you to all of you for coming back to Evergreen. And we're riding a wave, but these waves keep going. So hopefully some of you all can be sitting here in 5 to 25 plus years.
Yeah, maybe I'll be
sharing
working
your
for some of you.
Never too late, everybody. Never too late.
Stories, right? So I just want to thank them. And, this was a week 8 intention, so students could take a break from that work. So when you think about burnout, this was intentionally driven by our faculty conversation and staff to offer you all an escape from your rough cuts and all the things that you're supposed to deliver. So please, take this energy and now go put it into your creative work. And maybe we can clap for our panelists. Thank you all.